afternoon, and thank you all for being with us today. I'm Lisa Roberts, and I'm honored to serve as the president of the Westchester Jewish Council. The Council is proud to serve as the central communicating, convening, and connecting organization for Westchester Jewry. Since 1975, we have worked closely with our 130-plus member organizations, including synagogues and agencies, which in turn serve the Jewish community of Westchester of nearly 150,000 Jews. The Council's sole purpose is to connect and strengthen our Jewish community, and we all benefit from the work done by our dedicated staff, officers, and board members in the areas of security, government relations, connecting Jews to Israel and to other ethnic and faith-based groups, and by working with our member organizations across the county to help them better engage Westchester Jewry. It is truly an honor to co-host this event with our dear friends at the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center. We thank them, along with our elected officials, so many of whom are with us today, the Yom Hashoah Committee who worked hard to plan this event, and all of our partners for their work on behalf of the community. As we gather again this year, sadly, we must acknowledge and address the alarming rise of anti-Semitism and incidents of hate, which have targeted Jews and other ethnic minorities, including our Asian American brothers and sisters. As a community, we understand the importance of continuing our long-standing tradition of commemorating Yom Hashoah here in Westchester, even at difficult times such as these. And we are grateful for the technology that allows us to mark this solemn occasion virtually together. Next year, we sincerely hope to be back at the Garden of Remembrance in White Plains. I join with all of you today in a prayer for brighter days ahead as we work together toward a time when our core values of justice, equality, and mutual respect are realized.
It is an honor to read the names of the congregations who care for Torah scrolls rescued from the Holocaust, as well as the origin of those scrolls. Beit Am Shalom, Czechoslovakia. Beth Am Temple, Vlasim, Bohemia region of the Czech Republic. Beth Am Temple, Frýdek Místek, Moravian Silesian region of the Czech Republic. Bethel Pearl River, Vlasim, Bohemian region of the Czech Republic. Bethel Synagogue Center, liberated from Theresienstadt. Chavarat Tikva, Brno, Czechoslovakia. Community Synagogue of Rai, Prague, Czechoslovakia. Congregation B'nai Yisrael, Armagh, Pakov, Bohemia. Congregation Emmanuel of Westchester, Tabor, Czechoslovakia. Congregation Knesset Tiferet Yisrael, Simchow, a section of Prague, Czechoslovakia. Congregation Kol Ami, Brno, Czechoslovakia. Congregation Shir Shalom of Westchester and Fairfield counties, Brno, Czechoslovakia. Congregation Shir Shalom of Westchester and Fairfield counties, Kromeres in Central Moravia, Czechoslovakia. Congregation Sons of Israel, Briarcliff Manor, Studentenland, Czechoslovakia. Congregation Sulam Yaakov, Prague, Czechoslovakia. Greenberg Hebrew Center, Germany. Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center, Bohemia and Moravia, Czechoslovakia. Jewish Community Center of Harrison, unknown. Larchmont Temple, Moransk Budjedvice, Czechoslovakia. Reformed Temple Putnam Valley, Czechoslovakia. Scarsdale Synagogue, Mainz, Germany. The Lefel School, Bohemia or Moravia. The Lefel School, unknown. Temple Beth Abraham, village of Milevsko. Temple Bethel of Danbury, Hamid of Persice, Czechoslovakia. Temple Bethel of Northern Westchester, Baskovice, Germany. Temple Israel of New Rochelle, Prague, Czechoslovakia. Temple Israel of Northern Westchester, Austerlitz, Austrian Empire. Temple Shari Tefillah, Klatovy, Czechoslovakia. Temple Shalom, Czechoslovakia. Westchester Jewish Center, Berlin, Germany. Westchester Reformed Temple, Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia.
Trennenvögel auf die Zweigen, schlaf mein Kind, bei dein Wiegel auf dein Nave sitzt a Fremde und singt, bei dein Wiegel auf dein Nave sitzt a Fremde und singt. Lulu, siehst dein Wiegel, wo gestanden, ausgeflochten von Glück, und dein Manne, kommt schon keinmal nicht zurück, und dein Manne, kommt schon keinmal nicht zurück. Hab gesehen dein Taten laufen unter Hagel von Stein, über Felder ist geflogen, sein verjossener Gewein, über Felder ist geflogen, sein verjossener Gewein.
I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and we have come once again to commemorate those that we've lost through the Holocaust on this Yom Hashoah event. I reach out and thank the Westchester Jewish Council for bringing us all together again at this virtual event to remember and to not forget. The act of remembrance is to remember the names and the faces and the emotional connections of all the people that were lost through that terrible experience. Our challenge, as well as to remember those individuals, is to never forget the process by which a dictator arose in a nation and was able to manipulate a nation of people and to feed them with hate and lies and to have them turn on each other, their fellow countrymen, their neighbors, their friends, and treat them with such disrespect that caused the death of 6 million of them. This is a story that happened at a period of time, but this is a story that can repeat itself at any point in time in the future. Whenever we drop our guard, whenever we let little bits of hatred go by and we don't protest it, we don't turn and understand on the people that project this hatred that what they've done is wrong and that we reject it publicly, all of us together, and to any group, to the Jewish community and to all the other communities that make up the mosaic of Westchester County. So we thank you every year for keeping that light alive, that eternal flame that reminds us that people once lived here, but the things that they stood for live on. Thank you very much for this event, and together we will continue to fight hatred and we'll continue to look for the light.
For 364 days a year, when we think of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, we wrestle with its meaning. For one day a year, this day, we remember and we honor. For 364 days a year, we try to understand the Shoah, historically, theologically, philosophically. For one day a year, this day, we sit with the loss. For 364 days a year, we take what lessons we can about hatred and anti-Semitism and bystanders and upstanders, and we apply those lessons to our lives, to our world. For one day a year, this day, we simply mourn. For 364 days a year, we try to answer the question, why? For one day a year, this day, we allow our hearts to break, our tears to flow, and we allow that ultimately unanswerable question to go unanswered. Dear God, today as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, let us feel your presence as promised by the psalmist. For today, that is all we can ask. We pray only that we should not bear this grief alone, but know that we have one another and know that we have you, God, by our side. With this promise fulfilled, with the support of one another and with our faith, we will keep alive the memory of those who perished. Then, during the 364 days to come, we will strive to live our lives in ways that honor their memories and all that they held dear. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will.
Hello, friends. My name is Daniel Groper. I am the rabbi at Community Synagogue in Rye, New York, and the immediate past president of the Westchester Board of Rabbis. It is my honor to bring this special Kaddish for Yom Hashoah to you. Wherever you are, if you are able, I invite you to please rise. Yitgadal Auschwitz, Vayitgadash Lodz, Shemei Rabbah Ponar, Be'alma Divra Chirutei Babiyar, Ve'amlich Malchutei Maidanek, B'chayechon uvyomechon Birkanau, V'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael Kovno, Ba'agala uvizman kariv Janauska, Vayimru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Movorach Leolam Lamei Almaya, Yitbarach V'yishtabach Theresienstadt, V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam Buchenwald, V'yitnaseh V'yithadar Treblinka, V'yitale V'yithalal Vilna, Shemedu Kudsha Bergen-Belsen, Brichu Le'ela Mauthausen, Min Kol Birchata V'shirata Dachau, Tushbechata V'nechamata Minsk, Da'amiran Be'alma Warsaw, Vayimru, Amen. Yehi Shalaba Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chaim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom, Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, V'imru Amen. May the source of peace send peace to those who mourn, comfort to those who are bereaved, solace to those who still remember the Shoah and feel a sense of pain from it. As together we say, Amen.
Who is a member of several Speakers Bureau, including our own. He speaks at many universities and schools and tells his story. He is a survivor. It's particularly close and dear to me because my parents, as well as Andy, are all born in Budapest. And so his story is very familiar to me. His accent is also very familiar to me. I was born here in Westchester County, where I grew up. And we're just going to have a little talk with Andy about his experiences. And so I'm just going to first ask him I'm going to give just a tiny bit of history for those of you who don't know the story of the Hungarian Jews. They were the last intact group of Jews in Europe. The Nazis occupied, the Hungarians were already allies with the Nazis, but they occupied Budapest and Hungary in the spring of 1944. And they just started, this incredibly horrific deportation and ghettoization of the Jews, killing 70% of the Hungarian Jews in the final year of the war. Andy, now you were about 8 years old in 1944. Give us some recollections if you remember what happened when the Nazis showed up.
Just very quickly, I was born in October 31st of 1936. So actually, I just was 7-year-old, really a little boy when the Nazis occupied Hungary and particularly Budapest. Okay? And the very quick story that my father was in forced labor camp in Hungarian called Munkaszolgálat from 1940 on. So my mother was basically a single parent all the time. And the significant part of what happened, it was when my mother enrolled me to first grade in 1943. Now, she took me to school, which was a Jewish school, about 2.5, 3 blocks from the house where we actually rented an apartment. And it was a devastating experience for a 7-year-old when my mother allowed me to walk to school on my own. On that short distance, people spit on me, called me a dirty Jew, said, "You shouldn't be alive, we will kill you," and pushed me down to the pavement. Many times I was beaten. And that experience in the fall of 1943 was really devastating, and I didn't understand what was going on. And clearly, it was because I am a Jew. That was the only reason. They knew I am Jewish because I lived in a very heavily populated Jewish area, the 7th district of Budapest. And it accommodated a traditional Jewish life with kosher restaurants, synagogues, butchers, bakers, what have you. So that was my very first experience of the concept of anti-Semitism and a hatred of Jews. Then in the beginning of 1944, my father was able to get away from a forced labor camp, and he and my mother rounded up family members from the periphery of the 7th district and also in the city of Budapest and get them to move into our 2-room apartments. And it was a blessing. We didn't know then that area eventually became the Budapest ghetto, but it was much safer than anywhere else. And all the family members who gathered in our small apartment were survived. So,
amazing.
And then by end of February of 1944, my father disappeared permanently. And of course, fast forward, he did survive the death camp called Mauthausen. And he was one of the Holocaust survivors who shied away of having any conversation about his personal experiences in this devastating death camp, which is located in the southern part of Austria.
Now, do you remember when they started making you wear the yellow Jewish star?
Well, see, there was a very strange relationship existed between the Hungarian government and Nazi Germany with Hitler's government. See, Miklos Horthy, who was the regent of Hungary until 1944, he agreed the concept of creating an Aryan nation for Germany and get rid of the undesirable elements of society from not only Germany, but all around in Europe, okay? It was nothing else but racial purification policies which Hitler initiated after 1933. And so by the time 1944 came along, Miklos Horthy changed his mind, and he really wanted to get away from Nazi Germany, but it was too late. Hitler already made up his mind, then they are going to occupy Hungary. And then on March 17th of 1944, actually they came in and occupied Hungary and also Budapest. And at that time, it was other significant part of my life that my grandfather, who was continuously hiding in this time, he took me to what they call the Ring Road It is a major boulevard, go from north part of the river to the south part on a past side. And I have seen with my naked eye the SS marching in with the armband with a swastika on there, with black boots and goose steps. It was a shocking sight. And my grandfather told me, he says, "You have seen more than enough when I take you home." And during that short walk we had to go, he told me that Andy, our life as Jews will permanently change. And you know, I didn't really understood the words, but what I have seen, I haven't forgotten up to today. And 3 years ago, in August of 2017, I came home and I turned the television on, and I have seen a bunch of thugs, hoodlums, white supremacists were marching in Charlottesville. And I have seen the same thing, what I have seen as a 7-year-old. It reminded me that devastation, what that was causing in Hungary for the Jews, and to reminded me what is really happening in this country. So there was a direct connection there, okay? And then after when the Nazi occupation of Hungary, Adolf Eichmann came to Budapest for one purpose, to exterminate all the Hungarian Jews. Now at that time, it could have been about 650,000 Jews lived in Hungary. The majority of them lived in the city of Budapest in the periphery. And I call him a master killer, designed an assembly line rounding up the Jews.
Yes, did you have relatives, or did you know people who ended up in the Obuda brick factory as the
no,
get shipped off?
The majority of the family member who didn't live in that 2-room apartment what we had, they were deported into various forced labor camps in Hungary, and eventually either they ended up in Mauthausen or in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Now Auschwitz-Birkenau, that's where the majority, over 80% of the Hungarian Jews were deported there. And in
fact, an amazingly horrible statistic is that 1/3 of all the people who died in Auschwitz were Hungarians.
Yes, and what you mentioned about the Jewish badge, the newly created fascist Hungarian government, with the support of the Iron Cross Party, which was the major Nazi party in Hungary, on April 5th, if I remember correctly, required that every Jew must wear a yellow star on the outer garment on the left-hand side of the clothing. Okay, and obviously I wore it too, but I never left the building and I lived. And that is just a significant part of the building I lived in there, because it became an orphanage for over 150 Jewish kids. The ground floor has a kindergarten nursery school, which was affiliated with the Jewish agency. And also in the top floor of the building, there was a dance acrobat and studio. So there were a lot of space was available, and the Jewish agency took active role of trying to save as many children which were left behind on various ways when the parents and relatives were taken away to concentration camps, and particularly the Auschwitz-Birkenau, that camp, Treblinka was part of it. Okay, so it has a significant role. Then I didn't have to really move. I would, in that respect, was in a safer place than anybody else.
Now, do you recall at what point that at some point you already lived in the Jewish neighborhood? Now it became a ghetto. Do you remember when they like walled it off and you couldn't exit and enter?
Eichmann's activity took place from April to August, and deported all the Hungarian Jews, particularly outside of the 7th district. See, their philosophy, what I understand, was then we will keep them keep the Jews in one area, and when the time comes, we just come in there and round it up and take them to the train station and ship them the various death camps. Okay, thanks God, they didn't have enough time for it. But the Budapest ghetto was formed in end of August of 1944, beginning of September. It was about 74 acres, and the law was stated that all Jews from the city of Budapest must be relocating in that small territory. And also the non-Jews were asked to leave that area, okay? And at that time, all the streets were barricaded with about 7 feet, 8 feet tall walls. It was built just like you're building a building, stone walls. There were only 4 gates existed to the ghetto. And there were guards inside and outside. There was no way in and out, okay? And there was almost no news or information was coming in, even though we had radio, but the wavelengths were jammed continuously by the Hungarian Nazis as well as the Germans. And in the ghetto area, particularly we children, over 150 of us, were so-called entertained or kept busy with the people who lived in a building. It turns out there were a couple of people who lived in a building. There were also kindergarten teachers in that kindergarten nursery school.
No.
I just like to tell you a quick story about it, which actually saved my life. We were not allowed to go even to the courtyard unless the weather permitted in small groups, strict supervision. So we were playing around and I hit my head by running with the kids, and I hit my head badly and was started to bleeding. And my mother panicked, but my kindergarten teacher said, Clara, I'm going to take care of Wendy. So they were trying to patch up my head with some first aid, which was available. And then the kindergarten teacher's name is Rose. She removed the yellow star from my outer garment and just simply told me, you hold my hand strong, keep your mouth shut and walk with me. So we walked out of the building and I was scared because we were told we are not allowed to leave the building and we must wear the yellow star all the time. And so we went to the nearest gate and there is the Hungarian Nazi guard was yelling at her, show me your ID. So she did. And then she says, well, you are not a Jew. You were supposed to leave this area. This is for the Jews whom we are going to round up and take them to the concentration camps and kill them. But eventually, Rose succeeded and we were able to go to the hospital. On the way back, the guard outside asked the same questions. Then, when we got back to the building, of course, everybody was happy, particularly my family. The moral of the story is very significant. Here was a lady who never was married. Two was a very religious Catholic. She understood the environment and the humanity which was taking over her personality, to sacrificing her life to saving the Jewish boy who is now interviewed by Michael. Okay. And when I went back to Hungary the first time from the United States, she was the first person I looked up. And I kissed her and I said, you know, Rose, there is no words can explain or express the gratitude to save my life. There were many non-Jews who made effort to trying to save Jews. Unfortunately, there were not enough of them because the majority of the Hungarian Nazis were worse than the SS. They were brutal, they were continuously harassing, verbally, physically, all the Jews within the ghetto area. There's a couple of other stories I can tell you, but one of them, which is also significant, when my mother was born in a small town called Dunaharaszti, everybody spoke a German dialect called Schwab. Now, Schwabia located in the west, southwest corner of Germany. And at one time when the Hungarian Nazis came and rounded up the people of the building and took them to a collection place. And they were standing in line. And of course, everybody knew what is going to happen. They were sort of process them and taking them to the railroad station and ship them to one of the death camps. How we mentioned it earlier, the majority of the Hungarian Jews ended up in Auschwitz-Birkenau and traveling camp. But my grandmother from the village, who spoke this dialect fluently, had noticed an SS guard, and she dashed up to him and started to speak in this very strange dialect. And SS guard was stunned. And he said, "You're not a Jew. You go home, you don't belong here. This is the Jews. We are taking them to concentration camps." But my grandmother had a presence to continue this conversation in this strange German dialect. And then she said, "My sisters and my cousins are standing in line. They came up from the village. Hopefully we will be able to be safer in the city of Budapest than when we lived." And SS guard paused and said, "Take your family and go home." And so they left the collection area. They got back to the building. The interesting part is my grandmother had no sisters, had no cousins. It was the people who were taken away from the building. Here was a lady who had presence and understanding what's going on and was able to save all of us from the tragedy. But you know, they are just simple stories which I clearly remember as I was a 7 going on 8.
Now, what happened? Now, your parents survived the war, thank God. Now, you come to America after the revolution in 1956. Did your parents stay in Hungary?
Okay, just very quickly. In July of 1945, the same Rose who saved my life was screaming top of her lungs my mother's name. And my mother and I dashed to the corridor in our top floor. And then she says, "Your husband's slave is home." So I dashed up to the top floor to the ground floor faster than a rocket ever could move. I hugged the man, I kissed the man. I was crying. And when I took 3 steps back, I did not recognize my own father. He may have weighed 70 pounds. It was terrible conditions. It took my mother over a year to nourish him back to being again a human being. And many times during that year, he was crying, screaming during the nights. And my mother said, "Leave Daddy alone. He's living through the tragedy, what he lived through at Mauthausen." So he never spoke to me about it. I just picked up pieces from him. Now, how you asked me about what happened. I wasn't accepted to university for 3 reasons. Number one, I was labeled as an undesirable element to the society. My father was labeled as a capitalist. He used to own a business until when the communists took over in 1950, took away his license, forced him to work for the government for almost nothing. And so the second thing was, then everybody knew I'm a Jew. See, my birth certificate shows my religion. It was public knowledge. And thirdly, we were extremely poor people. And so we had no influence to able to get someone in the right places to get me into the university. So in 1956, the Hungarian Revolution broke out. I wasn't really part of it, but I was part of it. The demonstration and the activities which led up to the revolution for October 23rd of 56, I participated. And when the revolution started, which lasted 8 days, on October 31st, I was exactly 20 years old. I was able to walk out of my building when we lived. The first time I could say, I have hope. I have hopefully freedom to breathe fresh air since the revolution was victorious. And by November 23rd of 1956, while the Soviets were removed themselves to the periphery of the city to practically disappear from the interior part. They came back with tanks, armored vehicles, with thousands of soldiers, and destroyed everything inside. And at that time, I told my parents, as a 20-year-old, I'm going to leave the country. By that time, I knew that tens of thousands of Hungarians escaped. People who had relatives outside of the country, or just people who felt that the Soviets will destroy everything inside with the communistic brutality. And so I kissed them goodbye with an overcoat, no money, no valuables. I didn't speak any other language except Hungarian. I knew a little bit of Russian, and I left. Took me over 3 weeks to go from Budapest, Hungary, to Vienna, Austria. And that would be another story, how I actually get there. But when I get there, I was able to get to the American embassy. And by just a pure luck, the guard at the embassy let me in. And there I was able to obtain documents. Number one, then I was declared as a Hungarian refugee from the Hungarian Revolution, got all the papers, and eventually, end of December of 1956, over 3,000 Hungarians were taken from Vienna to Bremenhaven, Germany, the largest seaport, and we sailed with a ship called a Marine Carp to the United States. Now,
did you ever see your parents again?
Yes. Now, my parents took advantage of the relationship between Hungary and Israel in 1957. And the relationship was that the Hungarians said, we let any Jew out of the country if Israel take full responsibility for it. There was some kind of agreement. So my parents signed up for that. And my mother, my father, and my little sister emigrated legally from Hungary to Eretz Israel. They lived there for 3.5 years. At the same time, when I left Hungary in 1956, my mother's younger brother, a year younger, with his family, his wife and 2 children, escaped the country, but they ended up in Toronto, Canada. Because of the very liberal immigration laws between in Canada on blood relatives, my parents emigrated from Israel to Canada. I wasn't a citizen yet. And they wanted to come to the United States to me. And I said, I am not leaving this country. To me, this country is the greatest country in the world. And that's how I view it even today. So my parents emigrated to Canada. And shortly after, when I became citizen of this country, they were able to emigrate to the United States.
Oh, wonderful.
So obviously, I was able to rejoin the family, not permanently, because I went to college in East Tennessee. I went to graduate school in St. Louis, Missouri, and then I worked for IBM in upstate New York. So I never really lived with them, but we were continuously close contact. And my father died a little over 40 years ago. He's buried in Staten Island. In the meanwhile, my little sister grown up, finished college in New York, and with her husband emigrated to Israel. So my mother went to visit my sister 22 years ago. There he had a massive heart attack, and after open heart surgery, unfortunately, he didn't survive, and he's buried in Givat Shaul in Jerusalem. Now, so this is just a little synopsis of the family and my early years, okay, obviously I made the decision about 15 years ago, then I will try to put together my story and try to talk to in a public school system about my experiences and bring alive the reality then from 1933 on under the Nazi and occupation of Hungary and the deportation of the Jews. There are 6 million Jews were slaughtered by these gangsters, these thugs and hoodlums with the kind of philosophy what Hitler was able to brainwash them. And so we say, never again, never again. And this is a motto which is very significant for us to keep in mind and provide education to everyone whom we will be able to reach out. It's not only Holocaust survivors or child survivors, but relatives and associated people to educate people to trying to avoid the atrocities which occurred. Unfortunately, we live in a very difficult times. And I like to bring to your attention something very significant. I mentioned to you 2017 in Charlottesville, but I like to bring to your attention January 6th of 2021. I was absolutely shocked to see a t-shirt which is saying Camp Auschwitz. So anti-Semitism, unfortunately, is growing leaps and bounds with the white supremacist group, the various groups which existed. And I just also try to bring to your attention that in 2017, after the Charlottesville tragedy, our former president said there were fine people on both sides. I have news for you and to everybody. There is no good Nazi. It's all of them for only hate and to death. And those people who were wearing those armbands with a swastika on it and representing that group is nothing else but a detriment to this country, to our constitution, our way of life. And so we have to be very cognizant and very much aware of what's really happening. And it is our responsibility as Jews, I mentioned it, continue education in every which way to the general public that it is not tolerable and follow ADL accordingly and other Jewish groups, particularly significant college campuses. We must educate our children who go to college how to deal with the anti-Semitism which is existing on campuses. It is existing in my neighborhood at Yale campus many times when I have read in a paper, then at the divinity school at one point, swastika was drawn and slogans were written on a pavement. So we need to be very vigilant about it, and we cannot be a bystander. We must be an upstander. And there is a very interesting poem, I'm not going to read it to you, which is written by a Lutheran minister, German minister, which is a bystander. And the very last phrase is that after it says, then they came for me, and there was no one left to object. And if we feel that something is not right, we have an obligation to speak up in a proper way and trying to making sure that it never will happen again.
Andy, I thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for sharing your story and for being an upstander and for telling your family's story. And I'm just happy you were able to join me here today.
Well, it was really a pleasure, and I thank the organization of Holocaust Human Rights Education Center that I can be part of it and provide as much input to them as possible. and I'm always available any part in the tri-state area to tell my story and trying to bring the tragedies which occurred after 1933 to the public eye.
I want to thank everyone for attending this year's Yom HaShoah Commemoration. As chairman of the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center, I speak about my parents' wartime experience and how it has also shaped my life. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Westchester Jewish Council for co-hosting this event, as well as the Yom HaShoah Committee, Mitch Ostroff, Rabbi Howard Goldsmith, Cantor Robin Joseph, Westchester County Executive George Latimer, Rabbi Daniel Groper, and Andy Sharkani for sharing his story with us. And while the horrors of World War II may seem like a long time ago, it's only separated by a generation. My mother was an inmate in Auschwitz, and my father was a slave laborer. All four of my grandparents were murdered in Nazi death camps. The point I am trying to make is that the Holocaust is not so very far away. The children and grandchildren of survivors are members of our community. And as more and more of the few remaining witnesses pass away, who will remember their stories? At Yom HaShoah, we commemorate the memory of those who were murdered during the Holocaust. We also commemorate the bravery of righteous citizens in those extraordinarily horrible circumstances. The Garden of Remembrance in White Plains was built in 1992 and pays tribute to both those who perished and the bravery of those who define the word upstander. We encourage everyone to speak up and act against all forms of bigotry and prejudice. Please visit our website at hhrec.org, hhrecny.org, to see how we use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate and protect the future. Yet, unfortunately, there is no escaping the reality of the brutality and hate in our world. Every day seems to bring another example of the cost of hatred and racism. On this Yom HaShoah, I choose to tell the truth about the unimaginable price of man's inhumanity towards man, and I embrace the opportunity to advocate for dignity and respect for all people. The pandemic has, if nothing else, shown us that we are all one people, interconnected genetically. The virus does not care about your background or ethnicity. We are truly one people, and hopefully by this time next year, after Passover, we can all join together in person next year in White Plains. Thank you.